In this episode, we look at the question, why are we learning this, that we often hear from students. Do you have an answer to that question? My guest, Ryan Smith, will help us make sure that we are ready for that question when it comes. So let's jump in. Are you a language teacher looking for some reassurance that what you're doing in the classroom is on the right track? Or maybe you're looking for some ways to teach even more effectively. If you're one or the other or somewhere in between, you've landed in the right place. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast with your host, me, Joshua Cabral. You're about to get tips, tools, and resources so that your students continue to rise in proficiency and communicate with confidence. Let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. I'm Joshua. Real quickly, just look at your phone. Make sure you are liking or following or subscribing, whatever that app is asking you to do to make sure you get all these episodes. So now we are going to talk about the idea of using language as a vehicle for college and career readiness. Now, that sounds like a lofty topic. So I want to step back for a second. And if you've ever heard me talk about millennials and Gen Z, you've heard me talk about this idea of the fierce urgency of now. And I have to credit this idea of the fierce urgency of now to Jason Haber, who is the author of a book called The Business of Good. And he talks about Gen Z and millennials as being hardwired because of technology to have this fierce urgency of now. They can get quick answers to things. So sometimes you might hear that they're the instant gratification generation, which is very negative. That makes it sound like they're making a choice and it's their fault, but it's really not. This is really an idea of being hardwired for quick answers, and they actually do good with those answers. So one of those questions might be, why am I learning this? So this is where we get into this topic of having answers as language teachers when we're talking about why students are learning languages. So to help us grapple with this, get some great insights, and to see how we can have these conversations really effectively, I'm joined today by Ryan Smith. Now, Ryan spent 16 years as a high school Spanish teacher, teaching the AP classes and really getting into Spanish literacy with heritage speakers. And he is now a assistant principal of a middle school in Reno, Nevada. So he's sort of seen both sides of how to work with these generations with teachers as well as students. You can also see him on the conference circuit, like at AATSP and numerous state organizations. And he is also now an adjunct professor of teaching methodology, language teaching methodology at the University of Nevada. So I think he is the ideal person to help us take on this topic. So welcome, Ryan, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for having me today.
I kind of did the quick rundown of who you are, but I would love you to maybe fill in some of the blanks so that we have a better understanding of who you are.
Yeah, so thank you again for having me. So, yeah, like you mentioned, I was a classroom teacher for 16 years, best job of my entire life. Wouldn't change that experience for anything. And then after I left the classroom, I became a program coordinator in the central office of our school district, where I was world language program coordinator, AVID program coordinator, and CTE, which is career and technical education. When you're talking about this topic today, having that connection between world languages and that CTE world really just made me start thinking about the why of world languages a little bit differently. So I love this topic, and I appreciate that you're dedicating an episode to this topic.
Yeah, it's one of those questions of the we often think, oh, you can use this language or learn a language because you can travel or you can order in a restaurant or something. And those are the go-to answers so many times. And I know that you're going to help us look well beyond that. and we can walk away with much better answers to those questions and also to inform our teaching in a different way. So let's start this discussion by kind of just a fundamental question here. How is language learning an essential part of being ready for college and careers?
So I think languages are one of the most essential pieces for college and career readiness. And it goes way beyond the actual language. I think it has to do a lot with the skills that you learn in a language class
Mhm,
that you don't necessarily learn in other content areas. Those
mhm,
communication skills, those interpersonal skills where students actually have to listen to one another and speak to one another. And the language piece comes, I think, kind of secondhand to that because those skills are skills that everybody needs to be successful in any kind of career. If you're going to work with the public, you need to have good communication skills. And language classes provide that. I don't know where else students learn those communication skills exactly.
So it's this idea of it's the byproduct of learning the language is the communication skills. And it's interesting to hear it put in that context because that's personally not something that I think about. I'm so focused on how you're going to use this language, but not actually on the communication skills that are in there as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if we look at the three modes of communication in our standards, interpersonal, interpretive, and presentational, just those three skills alone are so essential for any career and for anyone to be successful in college. So when students are learning how to, we already talked about kind of that interpersonal skill, but interpret information. And again, I'm just talking about the skill right now, not the actual language piece. Of course, the language piece is so complex and adds so much more depth to that skill. But if we want to talk about why all students should take a language, it's to develop these specific skills, I think, for their future.
And also referencing the communication modes like you just did, it's actually helping to bolster their skills that they'll be using in other classes. Like we don't often think of, oh, you're in your Mandarin class and so you're just learning Mandarin. But if you're actually learning to you're honing your reading skills and all of the other modes, it's actually going to help you in other areas, which then becomes part of the advocacy for language programs. It's not just within the language classroom walls, but they're learning skills that they'll use in their other classes as well.
Absolutely. And going back to your example about ordering at a restaurant, that's
Hmm.
such a surface level answer to why learn a language.
Hmm.
Um, And I don't think that's a good selling point for most students or parents as to why they should be enrolled in a
Hmm.
language class. But when
Hmm.
I'm talking about how to read and take information out of text, how to mark the text, interact with text, students will be more successful in their science classes, their history classes, because they know how to interpret information.
These sound like really good talking points when parents and teachers and administrators are going before a school board trying to advocate for implementing language programs, particularly elementary programs. Like the French program in third grade, oh, yeah, they'll learn some numbers. These are the talking points that are going to get language programs into school buildings.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it
Yeah.
goes so far beyond just learning how to work together, learning how
Mhm,
to struggle through challenging topics. I think
mhm,
that's good at any age level. And to have
mhm,
the coping skills to learn how to do that,
mhm,
I think is great for all students. And yeah, I think those are the talking points
mhm.
when we look at implementing programs, especially at younger ages. There's so much more than colors and numbers to it.
Mhm,
It's that,
mhm. Right.
critical thinking skills and learning risk taking skills at an early age. They're invaluable.
I'm picturing my rubrics in my mind right now as we're having this discussion, and how much they're focused on being able to do all this stuff in the target language, which is important, but it's also there's a part of just being able to do this stuff.
Absolutely. The process, right?
Now, when a student is asking why learn this language, so hopefully once we're in the language class, we're going to be learning all these skills, but to give some convincing reasons, like why learn a language?
I'm so glad you asked that. When I had the heritage speaker classes, I would get that question all the time. Students would ask me, Senor, why I already speak Spanish. Why am I taking this class? And, I had to have a really solid answer for them. If I didn't have a solid answer for them, there's no way they're going to be engaged in that class. So it all came down to what are you going to do with language when I'm not around anymore? When Senor isn't there holding my hand through all of the activities and all of the practice and all of the assessments, ultimately, what am I going to do when I leave this class? And, my conversation really changed with students when I taught the heritage speaker classes, because before I would tell students, this class is going to be valuable for you in the future because you can travel, you can study abroad. And the more I thought about that, the more I thought of kind of the inequities I was creating as a teacher in the classroom. And I started kind of ditching that language and that message to students, because I realized that most of our students don't see themselves studying abroad.
Access to opportunity is what
Absolutely.
you're talking about there. Hmm.
Yeah, and a lot of students don't have the means to study abroad or take a vacation to Spain. But what can we do with the language right here in our own community? And how will that help you kind of propel yourself into the future?
Hmm.
And it all comes down to that first topic you said, being college and career ready. If everything we're doing in a classroom has to be with that laser focus of college and career readiness, because we
Hmm.
know that the lessons we're teaching, the activities we're engaging students in, they have to go beyond the classroom, and they have to appeal to all students, not just the students with college educated parents or students from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. We really have to reach all students. And that college and career aspect, that's what opens the door for all students. That's what gets students out of poverty. That's what gets that
Hmm.
imagination and that creativity in the minds of students, so they can actually see themselves using the language and the skills in their future. And that actually is the hill I want to die on.
So let's dive deep into that idea of college and career readiness. And first off, I want to make sure that we all have like an understanding, a common understanding of what that means to be college and career ready, and what those skills are that will make us college and career ready.
Those college and career readiness skills come from ditching the drill and kill memorization, do really well on a test and walk out the door, and that information stays in that classroom and will never leave with you again. So we want to get away from that
Hmm.
and teach students how to think critically. We want to increase our rigor. And I know a lot of teachers hate that word, rigor, but it's so important in the classroom, just to be intentional of, what we're asking students to produce and to do with the skills we're teaching. I think kind of like Joshua, I'm just going to make an assumption here. When we were young back in the day taking language classes, I think it was probably a
Hmm.
lot of flashcards and vocabulary lists and just rote memorization. And
Hmm.
so I look at how we learn language, and I don't want to slam my former language teachers, because, they made me fall in love with the content area and made me who I am now.
I think we always just have to remember that our teachers were doing innovative things for their time that was very different than
Absolutely.
audiolingualism from the 60s, you know, and they were moving into a more cognitive approach, and now we've moved to a more communicative approach. So I I think that we're definitely like honoring where we came from, and 20 or 30 years from now, people are going to look at what we're doing and we'll be like, I can't believe Ryan was doing that. I can't believe
Yes.
Joshua was doing that. I don't want to slam Joshua and Ryan, you know, but like we're working with the best and most useful information we have now in terms of research, which is exactly what our teachers were doing as well. So I when we reference the past, I always like teachers to remember that you were doing what was innovative for you at the time.
No, I agree 100%. And, I think that um, just with this shift in education as a whole, um, for us to really be cognizant of equity
Mhm.
in the classroom and inclusivity, that's kind of a different perspective
Mhm.
now in this day and age in education than from when we were in
Mhm.
school. And it's really exciting to see how curriculum has
Mhm.
adapted to, be more communicative and equitable for
Mhm.
all students. One thing that I think is really important here is when we're talking about college and career readiness, we have to be talking about college and career readiness for all
Mhm.
students. And so, first thing I think, this involves growth mindset too for a lot of us. First thing that has to go is any sort of prerequisites or barriers we place on students. I honestly believe all students should have the opportunity to learn a language. And it saddens me that sometimes, the system puts barriers on groups of students. For example, special ed students are not always encouraged to take a language class because of, whatever
Mhm.
reason. It might be too difficult for them. They might have reading issues that, the assumption is that reading in a different language is going to be too difficult. But what we're doing there is we're saying that you can't be college and career ready. And so if we really
Mhm.
believe all students should have these opportunities, we have to talk that talk and walk that walk.
Mhm.
When I go around and see departments that have prerequisites, GPA, for example, like you have to have a 2.5 GPA to take French.
Mhm.
I think that sends a message, a really negative message to students. And I think it looks badly for ourselves saying that, okay, so if you have below a 2.5 GPA, you can't have a career and you can't be college
Mhm.
ready. So, things we do with students when they're young really have that impact, that long lasting impact on their future. And, I think that's really important to be aware of. A lot of times languages are elective classes, but those are the best classes to engage
Mhm.
students because we can provide that college and career readiness through our content area. If we believe, and I do think that if you ask any language teacher, they'll say it's important for everyone to learn a
Mhm.
language. Well, then we have to take that philosophy back to our buildings and
Mhm.
our systems and implement that
Mhm.
philosophy and remove those barriers for students. One story I want to tell you is from a colleague of mine in Arizona, and she was telling me about a student in her school that had Down syndrome. And in her IEP meeting, the team decided that Spanish was going to be too difficult for this student. My colleague advocated for her and actually said, you know what? I would love to have her in my Spanish class. My job as a teacher, I'm going to teach her to be successful in this class, no matter what. Well, she graduated last year, this student with Down syndrome, and she received a 4 on the AP Spanish exam, and she took the assessment to earn the seal of biliteracy. And now the student enrolled in college. And so I think about this a lot because it would have been so easy for the committee to say, no, let's not give her Spanish. It's too challenging for her, or, whatever the reason is. But because someone advocated for the student, now the student's in college.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe Spanish was an entrance requirement, or a language was an entrance requirement for college. So we really have to be careful
Mm-hmm.
about those decisions we make for students without their input. I've never met this student in particular, but she actually really inspires me and a lot of my thinking around this topic.
So I'm sure that she was advocating for herself to study a language. It wasn't just other people. Like clearly it was probably, I'm assuming, something she wanted to do. And whenever a student says I want to learn something, like let's not put a barrier in there.
Absolutely, you were so correct on that. Yeah, they actually want to take a class or learn a subject, and a lot of times we tell them they can't, and
Mm-hmm.
shame on us as a system
Right. Mm-hmm.
for doing that to students.
So as much as we want all of our students to approach it just like that student did with please let me take this language even though you think it might be challenging for me, some students are going to need some sort of carrot put out there to be motivated to take these languages. So what are some of those like talking points we can use with students?
Gosh, those talking points all have to be related to what they're going to do in the future. So, a really great thing to do, I think, is a like future career inventory of your
Mm-hmm.
students. And, as the teacher, come up with, okay, how is my class going to impact you and give you marketable, beneficial skills for your future? And those have to be different for every student,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe some students will say they do want to study abroad. Well, then we need to promote that to those students. But if other students say they're interested in culinary arts or they're interested in engineering, we have to make our content area applicable to those students and say, this is really how you're going to use this language you're learning right now in your future career. And I really believe that's our jobs to make that connection, or help, at
Mm-hmm.
least help make that connection for students.
Can you talk us through a little bit about like sort of 21st century skills and how those what we're referring to when we say college and career readiness? Like what's that interplay?
Yeah, so those 21st century skills we hear about, one of them's collaboration, one of them is risk taking, one of them is interpersonal communication, one of them is leadership, technology literacy. And there's like 10 others
Mm-hmm.
that I can't think of off the top of my head, but I do know that a language class and language standards hit all of those 21st century skills like daily, like activity by activity. You're incorporating those 21st century skills, and they're not incorporated in all content areas, which that's the beauty. That's what's so exciting about being a language teacher, is you can graduate students from your program being college and career ready, having those skills. But we have to create activities to hone in on those skills. And so, when we're intentionally planning, if we're using those three modes of communication as the basis for all activities in the class, we're going to hit those 21st century skills with everything we do.
Mm-hmm.
If we're having those drill and kill, I would argue that we're not hitting 21st century skills. We're encouraging those memorization skills that kids leave in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my favorite memes, I don't know where I saw it, and it's only funny to language teachers, is it's a picture of a job interview happening, and the job interview person is saying, so what's your level of whatever language, Italian? And the response is, I can conjugate verbs, all regular verbs and irregular verbs in the present tense and the past tense. And then the person says back, yeah, but how is that actually going to help with this job? And it's like, that's not
Exactly.
really
It's
college and
so
career
true.
ready.
No, that is not.
So you had mentioned earlier when you were talking about the student in Arizona that she had achieved the seal of biliteracy. Can you talk to us a little bit about seals of biliteracy and different credentials that students can work towards through their, I guess, high school years that will prepare them for having, I guess, more opportunities going forward?
Oh, I love the seal of biliteracy. Um, I was fortunate enough to help lead the advocacy in the state of Nevada for our seal of biliteracy. And so this is something very near and dear to my heart because I do think, when we talk about carrots for students, seals and certifications I mean, that's what is current.
Mhm,
That's students understand why they're important right now. And so for seal by literacy, just not only to recognize that a student put in all their hard work of learning a second language or mastering their home language, I think the recognition from our states that they achieved something that is really special, and not all people have done that, I think is a selling point for students. I also think that because the seal of biliteracy actually is attached to a transcript,
mhm,
I think it has a lot of teeth there because it's not just a sticker anymore. It's something that you have worked towards, and it's part of your educational record now. I love the fact that universities around the country are honoring the seal of biliteracy, and some states are granting college credit to students that apply with that seal of biliteracy. There are jobs that when a student mentions they earned the seal of biliteracy in high school, then the employer knows that they are proficient. They probably don't know the jargon, but they see a student apply for a job with a seal of biliteracy and think, wow, this student can actually speak and understand this language. So,
mhm,
I think that's really great. And I see it becoming stronger and stronger as more states adopt a seal of biliteracy.
mhm,
I pulled the data up from the seal of biliteracy, and there are only 2 states now that have not implemented a seal of biliteracy.
mhm,
That is
mhm,
incredible in such a short amount of time. So,
mhm,
obviously, I think that value is seen nationwide. And, now it's our jobs as teachers and as school districts and as administrators, to help students see that value.
mhm. So, in creating the criteria for the sale of biliteracy, is it each state decides on what that's going to be, or is there sort of a national standard for that?
So that's a great question. So it is state by state, and it actually is signed into state law. And so each state they bring a committee together and work on proficiency levels, assessments, how students are going to demonstrate English proficiency so they can really be truly biliterate.
Mhm,
And then they implement that in their Department of
mhm,
Education. But when you talk about like the global seal of biliteracy, then there is a kind of an even playing field
mhm,
that's very consistent for all students across the country, even outside of the United
mhm.
States.
So the global seal would be students from every state or every country. It's the same criteria, whereas the seal of biliteracy would be by states within the United States. Right.
Exactly.
And so that also means, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the seal of biliteracy is for public schools. So is that available to independent private schools within the United States, or would they more be looking at the global seal?
So, I can only really speak for
Yeah,
Nevada
just
on
speak
this
for
one.
Nevada. You tell us what
Yeah.
you know and where you're going. And by the way, I practice saying Nevada correctly because everyone around here in Boston says Nevada, and so I wanted to make sure I was going to say it correctly to honor you.
You know, on behalf of all Nevadans, we appreciate that. We're the only state, I think, that encourage people to pronounce our state incorrectly. So, um, because it really is, it comes from a Spanish word, and that's just very controversial here. But um, um, in Nevada, when we were implementing the seal of biliteracy, it was important to send out that opportunity for all students.
Mhm,
So I can only speak to my school district here. So when I was helping implement the seal of biliteracy, I advertised it to all charter schools, to all private schools, to homeschool networks,
mhm,
because I really thought that all students should have the opportunity, regardless of their status, public, private, charter. So that was something really important to me. But I know that that didn't happen in all states. But I was really proud of
mhm.
that work here in Nevada.
Excellent. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I was on the board of directors of the Massachusetts Foreign Language Association for a number of years, and our advocacy chair, shout out to Nicole Sheriff, she really championed that for a very long time, and eventually we had that passed in Massachusetts. So I know the amount of work and effort that goes into that. So thank you for taking on that, and congratulations on making it happen. So I
Thank
would
you.
love to know where you continue to get your inspiration from. You spend your days now in the as an administrator and teaching teachers, but what keeps you going? What are you looking to?
What inspires me each and every day is walking in and seeing the students just happy to be there. They're so relieved that they're not learning on a computer anymore, that they're face to face. It's kind of, it's not back to normal, how we would think of normal, but being face to face with a teacher, not on a screen all day, that's where the magic happens. And those students inspire me every day, and the teachers inspire me every single day. I mean, I do what I do because I want to support my teachers more than they've ever been supported before.
Mhm.
And so I am just their champion, and honor their work daily, and just think, they do the most important job in the entire world.
Mhm. Thank you for being that type of administrator because that's doesn't happen everywhere. So thank you on behalf of your teachers who also tell you as well, I'm sure. So I would like to pull the curtain back a little bit on Ryan the educator and
Uh
get to know Ryan the person a little more. And it's funny because when teachers might listen to this and walk up to you at a conference or something, they might mention something we talked about seal of biliteracy, or they might talk about something like this. You never know where those connections are going to happen. So I'm just
All
gonna
right, I'm
yeah,
excited.
I'm gonna give you like an either or, and you just
Okay.
choose one. You can say why, but it's interesting to know a little bit of why. So the first one is you have something that's not incredibly important to communicate, but sort of important. Do you pick up the phone for a phone conversation or do you send a text?
Text. That was an easy one.
You're a
I
texter,
am not a phone talker. Yes.
huh?
Yes, I'm a texter for
Wow.
sure.
So you've loved the invention of texting, right?
I do. I do like it.
Yeah. So you're taking on something new. This is the next one. Taking on something new. And do you just jump right in or do you test the waters and go a little more slowly?
I'm a jumper. I like
Mm.
to jump right in. And test the waters as we are experimenting.
But then just jump right in.
Jump in.
Jump it
Yes, you
in.
gotta just, if you're gonna do it, you just gotta do it.
Just got to do it. Just got to do it. Great insights, so we can get to know you a little bit more with that. So I'm sure that there are teachers listening to us right now that would like to connect with you. What's the best way to connect with you to continue that discussion?
Anyone can connect with me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Reno, Reno, Senor, Senor. It should be Reno Senor, but the tilde is just not happening on Twitter yet. But or you could feel free to contact me on Facebook. I am a huge Facebook user. You just search Ryan Smith, Reno, Nevada.
So as we finish up this discussion today, is there one last solid piece of advice you can leave with teachers as they grapple with this idea of teaching students so that they are college and career ready?
What I would say is to work on your why. And so if anyone were to ask you, why are you a language teacher and why is it important? I think you need to have a very thoughtful and solid answer for that question. And I think if you don't have a solid answer for that question, your students are going to know that you do not have a solid answer for that question. And so practice it. I practice it myself. Why is it important? That would be my takeaway.
Excellent.
Or hope to be your takeaway is to answer that why.
Okay. I really appreciate your time today and your insights and taking on this whole idea of being college and career ready and finding out more about the seals of biliteracy and all the work you've done with that.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Thank you for having me.
So now do you have some more ideas for how you'll respond to that question when students ask, why am I learning this language? I'm sure you got some great ideas to ponder during that conversation with Ryan Smith. Be sure to check out the show notes so you can connect with Ryan. You'll also see a link to sign up for Talking Points, my weekly email newsletter with tips and resources for language teaching. I will talk to you real soon. Bye for now. You've been listening to the World Language Classroom podcast. Be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss a single episode. Let's continue the conversation on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at WL Classroom. You can also see over 250 blog posts about language teaching at, you guessed it, WLClassroom.com.